Welcome back to the Automate Show Theater, sponsored by Harmonic Drive. We're in our final day here at Automate. I hope you guys, if this is your first day, welcome. If you've been here with us all week, thank you so much for your support. It's really an honor to put on this show every year, and we're grateful for all of you who make it part of your calendar. We turn our attention this morning to something that's become a higher priority for us at the Association for Advancing Automation. Government advocacy. It's something that we've certainly, and Jeff Burnstein, my boss, will certainly speak to that as part of this, the long efforts that A3 and our predecessor associations played in communicating the importance of robotics to the national strategy. But we've really made it front and center over the last year, and a big part of that is the efforts of Brendan Schulman from Boston Dynamics, who's really taken charge of our efforts. Many of you, I handed out our push for a national robotics strategy and our A3 advocacy principles. Brendan has really helped us guide and put those together. And he's going to spearhead this discussion today on where we're going, what things we should consider next, and how we really drive governments forward to empower automation technologies in the future. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Brendan, to kick off this discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. Really appreciate it. And thank you to A3 for convening this session, which I think is very timely and really exciting. If you follow what's going on in the robotics industry across the board, we have the intersection of AI and robotics. We've got an advisor to the president who's working on a humanoid. We've got visions of robots helping out in society and all this funding that's going to new forms of robotics, in addition to what I understand is the biggest ever Automate in terms of attendance and show space. So really exciting time, not just to be in robotics and automation, but also to be engaging government and to be working on these issues. So really glad to have this session here to talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington and A3's engagement on these issues. Want to allow the panel to introduce. I've got this great panel of folks. I'm not going to say too much on my own. Want to just help people express their views. So Reyk, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, my name is Rick Knudtson. I'm an analyst over at SemiAnalysis covering robotics. Mainly we cover supply chain efforts as well as the artificial intelligence side. So we try and provide more general market intelligence surrounding what's going on in the industry and where it's heading.
Jeff Burnstein, I'm the president of the Association for Advancing Automation. We're the sponsors of the Automate show. I've been with the association for over 4 decades now, so I've seen a long span of what's gone on in the robotics industry, and also, as Robert alluded to, how government has looked at the robotics industry in the United States. So I'm excited to be talking about what we're doing now with advocacy and how hopeful we are that actually there's a chance that something positive may come out of it. So thank you for being here.
Good morning. I'm Erik Nieves. I'm the founder of One Robotics. We build warehouse automation for the parcel space, but I'm a longtime industrial roboticist. Programmed my first robot in 1988, and have been sort of following the industry ever since. So it's an exciting time to be in the robot space.
Thank you. So one of the things that trade associations like A3 often do is to engage with government. That's really a way to put our collective voices together and focus attention and build champions and supporters for the industry. Jeff, I want to take us back a little bit in time. A year ago, we had a similar session at Automate in Chicago. And that was really the start, around then was the start of the Advocacy Committee that we put together and that you asked me to lead. Just wanted to get a sense, maybe for those who weren't here last year or who want to learn more, what was your thinking behind doing that and A3's engagement with government to date?
Well, when we put the Advocacy Committee together, we had a real champion for it, and that was Brendan Schulman, who has experience in, I believe, the drone industry. My mic is falling off here, so I hope everyone can still hear me. And so Brendan encouraged us to try and get together a group of people who were passionate about possibly getting government support for the efforts to grow the robotics industry in America, which aligns with our viewpoint as an association that despite the fact that we're a global organization with members from all over, including China, we believe that all governments should be supporting the robotics industry in their country. And so we brought together all these people who were interested. We've had a series of great meetings with the Advocacy Committee. We've outlined several principles. And then recently, we developed a proposed vision of a U.S. national robotics strategy. And we recently presented that in Washington, D.C., at an event that was held by the U.S. House of Representatives China Select Committee. And it was a great event. We had 7 congressmen on a panel with about a dozen or so industry people and myself talking through the issues, why we might need a national strategy, what we were recommending, what the challenges were being faced by companies in this industry like Erik's, and great receptivity to what we were talking about. 3 more congressmen came to see the exhibit that took place after the discussion. We had many companies there. And that week I also went to see people in government who are working on potential national strategies around robotics. Robotics has been kind of left out. AI has gotten a lot of attention by the government, many other technologies, but we've sort of been left out of these discussions. But that's no longer true, thanks to our efforts and the lobbyists that we've employed to help us. So this is an exciting time for us in terms of knowing that actually people are interested and that they're going to listen to what we have to say, and that we have a lot of members passionate about this. So that's kind of where we are today. We'll go into more detail as this panel continues.
Yeah, thank you. We will cover some of the event, the strategy in a little bit more detail. I think those are the highlights of the past year or so. But Erik, you've been on the Advocacy Committee from the outset. Really would love to hear your thinking, your company, why spend time, why engage to work with us together on these kinds of issues?
Yeah, at the end of the day, society is still grappling with important questions, and if society is grappling with them, then it's reflected in the administration and in Washington and in policy, right? The questions of, this myth of robots versus jobs. Is this a zero-sum game? Robot in, person out. What to do about an aging workforce and the dependency ratio. Supply chains and what should we make versus what should we buy? These are all large, important questions that we have to grapple with. And the best way to do that is through focused energy, speaking as one voice for the industry. And so it was, I think important to be able to, go to Washington and say, these are the things that we see on the ground and how you should be thinking about these bigger questions.
So I think some of those issues have tended to come up over the years, Jeff. The job loss or displacement, concerns about safety. You did mention that our advocacy principles. Maybe we'll turn our attention to that, and we take a look. These are kind of like the 5 things we came up with initially. And again, we discussed this in greater detail last year at the session. These are sort of overarching principles for how A3 would like to engage with government. Any sort of thoughts on sort of how we framed this about a year ago, Jeff?
Well,
I think your mic once again. Let me see if I can help you here.
Fall off here.
Try that.
That's better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, we talked through these things like Erik just was talking about. What are the issues that we need to focus on even before we come up with a national strategy? What kind of things should be incorporated? And of course, they're all on the screen here. But the main one is we started with, we need a national strategy. Look, China has one, Japan has one, Korea. All these countries either have or are about to adopt national strategies around robotics. It's one of the most important, if not the most important, technology of the future. Why don't we have one? So that was something we all agreed on. We think that robots create better, safer, and higher paying jobs. One of the reasons we think this, we've looked at data that goes back more than 3 decades. Really interesting trend. When robot sales in the United States go up, unemployment goes down. And when robot sales in the United States go down, unemployment goes up. What is the relationship between those? Well, what happens is companies are feeling that there's opportunities out there, they're investing more in technologies like robotics, which is allowing them to expand their businesses and hire more people. And so we've seen that, and the best example was between 2010 and 2019, before COVID, the greatest expansion of adoption in US history. Unemployment went from nearly 10% to 3.5%, record lows. So when people say robots are job killers, they change jobs, I agree. But look at the jobs that are being created. The real threat to jobs, we believe, is when companies can no longer compete, because that's when all the jobs are at risk. And the rest of these principles deal with things like workforce training, which became a very important element. The jobs that are existing today are very different than jobs before. You need a skilled workforce, and we need it right now. With reshoring, with no reshoring, we need more skilled workers than we have right now. And so that's a real critical one. Improvements to economic policies, tax policies. China incentivizes adoption. Of course, different type of government, but we don't incentivize adoption. In fact, the way we even talk about it sometimes is like robots are, some congressmen, when I would go there, were like, oh, we don't want to talk about this issue. We don't even want to talk about robots because we're afraid people will be scared that they're going to lose their jobs. And then finally, the government needs to take advantage of robotics, and we go into detail with them in our national strategy about the ways that they can do that. They can be a leader. They need these technologies, and they're not using them. So that's a quick rundown of the principles that guided our national strategy.
So I think there's been a bit of a shift in government thinking about robotics really very recently, and part of it is the intersection with AI. Part of it is all the investment going into humanoids and quadrupeds. And that sort of leads me to Reyk, your piece. Put it up on screen. So this was a piece in SemiAnalysis entitled "America is Missing the New Labor Economy, Robotics." And you started with this line, which I encourage you all to look this up and read it later. It's a fascinating overview. This is a call for action for the United States of America and the West. And then that same opening paragraph refers to this situation as an existential threat to the U.S. as it is outcompeted in all capacities. That's pretty attention-grabbing. Would love to hear more about how, your analysis and how you get to those kinds of conclusions and observations.
Yeah, for sure. So it is an attention-grabbing line, but I'll say that we do stand by it. I don't think it's overblown. For starters, I think Erik already brought it up, but the kind of global backdrop generally is a kind of struggling labor force. We're having a shortage, especially in skilled labor. We're going to see, and we're continuing to see, declining birth rates, which are only going to kind of compound this issue. And we can point to robots as a solution for this, and I agree. I think this is it's a functional solution for the most part for automating labor or increasing production capacities. But I think one key thing that we want to touch here is that these robots are still very particular systems. They require a static task for the most part. A static task, a perfect environment, a perfect structured world around them. Otherwise, a few millimeters of inaccuracy could lead to a broken process flow and a costly hour of downtime. And so this is where I have to say the phrase that nobody likes saying, but that this time it's different. But Yeah, to be fair, I think this time it's different. I think we've seen, especially with the rise of AI systems and AI models, these have become profoundly intelligent systems, far more than we've had before. AI is not a new thing. It's more foundation models and large language models are. We've had deep learning before, but now we're seeing like ChatGPT, which I don't know about you, but I use nearly every day, surpassing most humans in intelligence across most tasks and most domains of knowledge. And the stance we kind of take is that while it's a difficult path, it's currently underway and will continue to translate into robotics. And what this will look like is essentially a more general purpose autonomous robot, which means more of a drop-in supplement for one human unit of labor. I hesitate to use the word replacement. I think it's a bit strong, but a supplement for human labor. And what's going to happen is that as these intelligent systems are deployed, they're going to continue to scale in such a manner where data is further collected, which improves the intelligence. They become cheaper as they scale in terms of manufacturing. They're going to drive unit costs down, and they'll be able to kind of start a flywheel almost of furthering deployments. They become cheaper, they learn, they get faster, they become more versatile in the tasks they can perform. And I think this is inevitable. So the question is more, who's on the right track and who's not? And I phrase this as a call to action or a call for action for a reason. I don't think the race is over anything. I think we're in the perfect time frame or window of opportunity where we can still step up and compete as this comes alive. And these systems continue to grow, they continue to scale, they continue to reach throughput far beyond what a human can perform, what most automation systems can perform now. And you'll reach impossible production capacities that if we're not able to match, then I mean it poses a giant economic threat that's going to be pervasive across industries.
Erik, does that resonate with you, some of those points? That a large part of this is just how well China is doing in robotics and the rate of implementation and the technology cycle. That's something that impacts Plus One. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, scale matters. And scale matters across a number of dimensions. One of them is just your capacity. And in that regard, it's an issue. But when we talk about sort of this generalization of capability as robots ostensibly become more able to deal with change, then scale still matters, but it's scale of data. And while the world is experiencing a ChatGPT moment, I would argue that yes, directionally, the same is going to be true in our world of physical AI and automation, but the time horizon is necessarily different just because the amount and the types of data that are required just aren't as readily available. You can't scrape the internet and have a general purpose physical robot moving through time and space. But directionally, this is 100% correct. And we need to think about what can we do in lieu of having the same types of scale that they see abroad.
Well, one of the things we can do is engage with government, and maybe turning to recent developments, which Jeff, you hinted at, just some slides here from the event on Capitol Hill from late March. I was there with Spot. It was a lot of fun. But I think it was also educational for members of Congress. And look, we are in a moment across technologies where there's intense interest on what China is doing, competition, and of course robotics, as you can see here on the floor, are all about automating manufacturing. So it's not just its own industry, but it's also an enabling technology for so many other industries, manufacturing, energy, defense, you name it. So maybe Jeff, tell us a little bit more about this event from March and sort of your takeaways from it, who organized it, and what were some of the themes?
So the China Select Committee wanted to have this event on robotics so that they understood where we stand competitively with China. They're aware how much China is going all in on humanoids. And for those of you who don't know, China came from nowhere in the world of robotics. Again, I told you I started 40 years ago. Nobody was talking about China. 30 years ago, nobody was talking about China. And what happened was they decided that this was, I believe, this is what happened. They won a lot of manufacturing on the basis of low-cost labor. American companies shipped manufacturing abroad. We used to have a saying in the United States back in 1982 or so. You have choices, American industry. You can automate, emigrate, or evaporate. But your company has to do something if you're going to compete globally. At this time, the worry was Japan. And so Japan was embracing robotics. They had a national strategy. They became the leaders in adoption. This industry was invented in the United States. We lost it. We went, as our association, to government officials in the early 80s and said the same things we're saying now, only it was about China this time. Look, you have a chance here. You have to listen. You have to do some things. You have to take this seriously or it's all going away. And China will be the biggest beneficiary. You're a committee on China. You're worried about China. They are the leading adopter of robotics in the world. I think all the countries combined aren't even close right now to what China's doing. And their goal, though, is to also be the leading manufacturer of robots. That's been a little harder for them, but they see an opportunity, particularly in humanoids. And that's why you're seeing stories about Chinese marathon that humanoid robots are running in. And we look at it and scoff and say, oh, well, they didn't do that well. The fact that a robot can run a marathon, that is doing well. Listen, they're only going to get better. They have policies that are all the things that we want to do and that we're recommending, they're doing. And so this event was about that discussion. And it was about them seeing some of the capabilities and where we are in certain areas. They're focused on the shiny thing, which is humanoids, but the reality of where we are with robotics now, humanoids is likely further in the future, but the real world, traditional industrial robots, collaborative robots, mobile robots, doing real work today is what I'm concerned about, as well as where we're headed. Anyway, so we had this discussion, and we said, you really need to think about, and if you want me to run through the principles now,
Well, we'll get there.
of the strategy, you want to do this now?
In a minute, because I want to go to Erik and hear about his
Yeah.
impression of the event.
All right.
So you were there.
Yeah, you know, one of the surprising things for me, because there were a lot of things we expected that came to pass, but one of the things that was a surprise is the focus on cyber. You know, we always talk about robots and automation as a systems problem, and it's, you know, control and mechanisms and the other things, well, and software. Well, now it's also cyber, because every robot that we deploy is now sensor driven. So there's just more, you know, connections on the floor. And there was this sort of sense of foreboding about it there, like earthquakes. You know, it's been 20 years since Stuxnet shut down the Iranian centrifuges. And it's like, we know there's going to be another thing. We just don't know where or when, but we feel like we're overdue. And, you know, the sort of comeuppance for me was, we all need to be thinking about how do we ensure our systems are secure on the floor. All right?
So one of the things that came out of this event for me, obviously, was convened by a committee that's focused on China, but really this is how the reporting came out, and I think it was right. It was the industry, and by the way, that was an event, the symposium part of the event was co-hosted by A3, so thank you for the leadership on that and working with Congress to make that happen. I think it's great to have robots on Capitol Hill. But this is really the the message was we need a national strategy, we need a central office, we need to start working together. And Reyk, your piece says, I'm quoting here, in the US we see a strange phenomenon of having a highly advanced tech sector, but both a lack of national strategy and the drawbacks of outsourcing manufacturing. Can you tell us about other countries? Do they have a national strategy? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think Erik touched on this as well, that there's strategies across Japan and South Korea. I think Japan is a Society 5.0. Europe has Industry 4.0. They're even doing a new AI initiative as well for, I think, large-scale data center build-outs. Of course, China has many. There's Belt and Road, not specifically robotics, but materials and manufacturing. And then recently, the Humanoids for Growth, or Humanoids posing as a growth engine kind of initiative, where they target humanoids as a functional form factor and a real unit of human labor by 2027. And these kinds of things you don't really see in the US. I'm not totally sure why on the policy side of things, but it seems that as administrations switch over, a lot of policies don't carry over sometimes, or sometimes things will be tabled, things will be scrapped. But that general lack of a national initiative has proven to kind of let almost capital market incentives take over as well, which is usually a good thing. But in this case, we see that as being you export manufacturing abroad for cheaper costs, for more efficiency, for a better supply chain, and that renders us a bit reliant on that supply chain or the foreign entities and whoever it may be. One of the co-authors on the paper, Joe from Quintet AI, has a very good phrase that I love to use. It's power comes from dependency. And in this case, we've manufactured ourselves right into a dependency by just handing it over. And so the lack of a national strategy has been good for the free market, but for the US, it's a bit of a challenge now.
So Jeff, we worked with the committee, all three of us, to develop a vision for what the national strategy might include. And that encourage you all to take a look on the A3 website to find that. And here's sort of the points that we came up with. And Jeff, maybe take us through some of those, and then I'd love to hear Erik's perspective too on how we got to these 5 or so or 6 principles of what should be in the national strategy of the kind that Reyk was describing. So Jeff, why don't you take us through
I'll do this quickly because they're on the screen, you can read them, but there's no central point right now in government that you can go to and talk about robotics. You might go to the National Science Foundation and talk about something. You might go, to the Defense Department and talk, but there's nobody who's coordinating this. There's no central place. That we think is critical. Tax incentives to drive adoption. China's doing this. Other countries have done it. The more robots we can get out there, the more competitive America will be. Government needs to adopt Department of Defense. We don't make enough tanks. We don't make enough munitions.
Shipbuilding.
There are shipbuilding. We really need to use robots where we can. Logistics, we don't. Expand workforce training. We talked about that. There's a big emphasis here at Automate. We have to have a skilled workforce if we're going to bring back more manufacturing. Academic research has always been funded, but commercial innovation often isn't, and a lot of promising technologies don't ever get further without that support. And finally, we need industry standards. Associations like ours have been leaders in this space of standardization for robots, particularly in the area of safety. Safety is going to be a critical area for humanoids, and we're now active in that area, but we could use government input on what they see as well. Cybersecurity being another one. So these are the foundations of what we propose.
So what I like about this, just to add a comment here, is how sort of positive and supportive it is intended to be. Although China is obviously driving a lot of this in Washington, and we've talked about that, these are not anti-China policies, right? These are pro-industry policies intended to just make sure automation and robotics flourishes across industries, and that the industry has the kinds of programs in place to help make us successful. Obviously, there also have been policy developments that would be, whether they're tariffs or restrictions on certain kinds of Chinese robots or drones. Those kinds of policies also could be a factor here, but this strategy is really focused on the positives.
Yeah.
Erik, what do you think? Any highlights? Any, of these six, what do you like the best?
I like that, it's a sandwich. We're talking about, funding academic research and such so that there's more supply of solutions out there. And that's really important in robotics because we've proven already that the open source community can make real progress in automation without government, right? But that's software. So the whole ROS ecosystem grew up out of an open source effort. Great. But robotics is a systems problem again, which means there's a lot of hardware involved, and hardware needs support. So, point number 5 here is lending some of that support on the R&D side. But even more significant is on the demand side, where we're saying, hey, let's put tax incentives in place so that the users can more readily adopt robotics or automation and do so while mitigating their risk. We do that. The innovation engine that is represented here will go in and step into the gaps. But you need to sort of set that table through both supply and demand.
So Reyk, you raised the alarm and you called for action. And as the outsider to the industry, do you think we're on the right track? Are these the right things for us to be asking for? Do we leave something out?
Yeah. I think, I gave these a read just after Brendan contacted me, and I found them to be, mostly encapsulating, actually. The only thing I would kind of really hammer in, which I think it's implicitly implied throughout the piece, but I really want to make sure that we're emphasizing we need communication channels between the policymakers and actual industry experts. I think these exist. I don't think they're strong or robust enough. I think if you want to generate a good policy, if you want to lead a good central robotics office, you need to have some type of boots on the ground information. And so I think these communication channels between the two are going to be vital for us to implement something that works and that's functional.
Jeff, what's next for A3 on advocacy? Is there opportunity for folks who might be interested or concerned to get involved? Where do you think we're going?
I think there are multiple opportunities. One, of course, would be to get involved on our advocacy committee, but another one, there's a Congressional Robotics Caucus. You probably wouldn't know that because it's been pretty much dormant for the last 4 years since COVID hit. And AI caucuses in government have gotten all the attention. But we're restarting this Congressional Robotics Caucus. It will have 4 co-chairs. I don't know if this has been publicly announced yet, the 2 new co-chairs, but there will be 4 from 4 different states. And so once that is announced, it will be great if each of you who is interested in talking to your congressperson about, hey, maybe you want to be involved in this Congressional Robotics Caucus. We plan to hold meetings and events to get them thinking about these issues that so deeply impact not only the suppliers, but also the users of technology to make America more competitive.
Yeah, I would just add to that. So before I had this role, I was in the drone industry, and there was a lot of attention on drones, emerging technology, doing things that had never been done before. And I was sort of surprised that when I moved over to the ground robotics industry about 4 years ago, sort of how little engagement there was or interest by government in all of this. That's sort of astonishing. I think that's changing thanks to our work and A3's leadership in Washington. But it really comes from the ground up. If you are doing something important, you have jobs, you have automation, you have your own company's goals, talk to your members of Congress, bring them to your facility to see what the technology is, what it does, why it's important. Connect with the folks here at A3 who are working on these issues. But there's always value in finding those local champions. Erik, any thoughts on where we go next? I've tried to, in the committee, we have meetings on an ad hoc basis. I don't believe in just doing meetings for the sake of meetings, so try to keep it to a reasonably minimal commitment. Any thoughts on what it's like to work on these issues as a member?
It's accessible, and I think it's impactful. What drives me is we know that the engine of manufacturing is going to be the small to medium manufacturer, right? And where are they going to get their robot engineers, technicians, operators, et cetera? Well, it's going to be because there is a workforce and a pipeline that they can tap into. Well, how are we going to drive that? We're going to drive that nationally and regionally. And while there's pockets of it happening, to Jeff's point, there is no single point of coordination. And this is an opportunity to make what's been successful in a couple of areas successful nationally. And I think that that's important, and it's part of the reason that, working with this advocacy group is important and I think encouraged. It'll make a difference where you are.
So, Reyk, before we go to questions, I'll give you the closing thought here. You've been here for a few days, talked to a bunch of people, you've studied the industry, or maybe you're beginning to. Any sort of reflections? Are we different from other tech industries that have similar challenges? Is there something unique about robotics and automation, or is this just part of the story of, AI and social media and self-driving cars and drones and semiconductors?
Yeah. So first time at Automate, thank you all for being so kind to me here. It's been a great time chatting with the people around. In terms of being a different industry, yeah, there's a distinct challenge in robotics, in that being it's a systems problem where we have great foundation AI, we have state-of-the-art foundational AI models coming out of whoever, Google, OpenAI, but producing anything cutting edge like this in robotics requires a real strong engineering on the robotics, on like the actual hardware side. And I find that to be distinctly defining of this industry currently, because if I go around and I speak to the startups, many of them, and this is not a knock on them, it's more a reflection of where we are, many of them are going to be software startups, because the fact of the matter is being a hardware startup in the US is not easy. We don't have the supply chain built for this very well. It's not cheap. There's actually been a few startups who started in, say, San Jose, and they moved to Shenzhen because you can get your parts there. You can get them like within an hour. They're going to be half the cost. You can iterate at speeds you could not in the US. And so I don't blame anyone here for starting a software startup, but we're still trailing a little bit on the hardware side of things, and that's going to pose a real challenge that I'm hoping we can see get filled in the near future.
Great, thank you. Would like to open it up for questions. There's a microphone in the back, in case you want to direct them to any of us in particular. Our names are up on the screen. Don't be shy, we're happy to take your questions. And if you could introduce yourself, that'd be great too.
My name is Erik Vanrich. I've been a management consultant working for Japanese companies and the Japanese government for over 20 years. And I'm back here on this side of the Pacific Ocean now. And I've had the opportunity to engage with the Japanese Robotics Association in Japan, as well as government advocacy on behalf of other clients and other work. And so I'm familiar with your process. One of the things that I would ask you that I don't see turning up in the list up there is, how does your advocacy and what you propose change the decision behaviors of the people that make decisions? The government doesn't make decisions. What can you do that changes people's behavior? What actual costs or benefits and their perceptions of what they can do? Because until that changes, nothing will change, irrespective of government policy.
Thank you. Very thoughtful question. Maybe I'll answer it and then see if Erik has some thoughts or anyone. There is a cultural challenge too, right? Many industries manufacturing or otherwise have been doing things a certain way for decades, and they may be slow to adopt robotics and automation. We're seeing that at our company. You need to prove the ROI in order to sell the robot, but because, at least in our case, it's a totally new type of robot, that's a pretty difficult proposition. And I think if we can get government excited and engaged, not even with tax break funding or some of these other things that we have on our list, but just as sort of moral support, like excitement, like to have robots on Capitol Hill is pretty cool. Maybe next time we do like a symposium on the National Mall. Robotics are here. I think the education to have government saying that these are beneficial and going to help industries. They're going to support worker safety and keep the jobs here, because if we don't have efficient automated production here, we lose the whole industry, right? You want to manufacture something here, you want to reshore jobs, you need the robotics and automation. So it is a culture shift too. I hope through industry efforts and government policy work, we can kind of move in that direction. But you're absolutely right, it's more than just government. Erik or Jeff?
I worked for a Japanese robotics company for 25 years. I was at Yaskawa. So I appreciate your perspective, and it is true that there is a cultural difference in these two, views of robotics. And some of it really is just cultural touchstones. In Japan, children grow up with Jet Boy, right? Jet Boy is your friendly robot. We grew up, at least the last generation, grew up with Terminator. And so just culturally, we have set up robotics differently in the mind of the everyday person. But Erik, I actually believe this was a generational thing and is now past us. As we think now about just robots culturally in just pop culture, it's much more about, Iron Giant and robots are friendly and a robot can be your mom, all of this type of thing, and not so much, Terminator 2 Judgment Day. So it seems trivial, but these things matter at the level of the everyday person, right?
Great. Any other questions? All right. Got a couple minutes here.
Hi, my name is Carl Daru. I work in the self-driving car space. As I look upon the 6 items that you proposed to the government, I don't see any metrics. I don't see anything measurable. Was that presented to the government as SMART goals, as you can say, something measurable, and having a strategy that by 2035 we're going to have a 23% increase in whatever?
Yeah, great question. I think this is the starting point, right? I think, as we've alluded to, there hasn't been much going on between government and industry for decades, and we're trying to change that. You got to start with ideas. Like, what is it we should even be doing together before you get down to like numbers and details? There's even a question as to what is a robot? What is in the scope of this? Is it everything on the floor here? Is it a more defined category? So I think we'll get there. Any thoughts on metrics? Maybe Jeff?
No, I think that's a really good observation. I mean, this is why we sort of position this as a vision for a strategy, right? A concept of a plan, if you will. Because we have to make sure everybody's on the same page in what it is we're trying to accomplish. If they are, then we can move to the metric stage, I think.
I think we can sneak in that one last question on that side before we wrap up.
Hello, I'm Josh, work in food manufacturing. We're looking at a large capital investment right now, automating food production, seafood. And how obsolete will our current investment be when humanoid robots enter the workforce? If we're looking at 6-axis robots, a large fleet of them right now, and the infrastructure around that, what disadvantage will we be at when humanoid robots can enter a conventional facility with no additional infrastructure?
So I think we're developing a humanoid. So I'll take that first. Look, the humanoid form factor, it's just a different shape and size of robot, intended to work in places built for humans. That doesn't mean that other forms of automation different configurations, all the stuff you see on the floor, that there isn't a place for that. In fact, there's probably a much bigger market in all of that for a long time to come. But the advantage of the humanoid from our perspective is you just drop it into a place, you use AI to kind of train it, and you're making up for maybe labor that isn't available because of demographics. So I don't think an investment today in other forms of automation is a bad investment. It's just different. And you're not someone who would thereafter be looking for a humanoid. Our friends at Agility are here. Would welcome you to ask them that question too, because they're already commercially deployed. Thoughts? Anyone else?
Eric?
If you're in a high volume application, then you're probably going to be just fine, right? Because purpose-built versus general purpose, no general purpose anything has ever outperformed a purpose-built thing for that thing. So if in fact you have a lot of that thing, then I would worry less about the displacement, there. Humanoids have an important role to play, and it's going to be when you have lots of things that need doing, but not any one of them for a lot of time. Right? I'm going to do this for a while, then I'm going to come over here and do this for a while, and I'm going to do this for a while. It's more generalized and it's more fractional. But in an application like yours, if the volume is there, you're going to be all right.
Yeah, I'd kind of second that as well, honestly. If you can automate it well and you're okay with the necessary structure you have to do in order to automate it, say you can only have a set amount of SKUs going across one conveyor or across one arm, if you're okay with them, then that's fine. I mean, they're functional, robust machines. They work for years. I think you'll be fine. It'll just be a capital investment that'll pan out, really.
Yeah, and our target market for Atlas is automotive manufacturing, things that are heavy, dangerous. Again, that's where we think the value is for that form factor. In any event, thank you all for attending and the panel for such an interesting session. Really appreciate it. I'll be around if you had individual questions, maybe at the back of the theater, and enjoy the rest of Automate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
here. Good job, Lee.